Why can money wait forever while bread cannot? It's a pretty heavy question, isn't it? Just picture a cold night at a shipping port. You're looking at all these giant cargo containers full of goods, and then realizing that everyday people are out there struggling to afford the absolute basics. That exact scenario is what opens Sari Qasim's highly provocative text, setting the stage for a deep dive into the human struggle right at the heart of our modern economy. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're looking at a system that challenges our most fundamental assumptions about wealth, time, and human survival. So let's dive right into this. We are unpacking a fascinating text called The Nation's Evolution by Sari Qasim. It proposes a massive, radical systemic overhaul called Blockchain Macroeconomics Theory, or BMT. Now, just to be totally clear up front, our goal here isn't to take sides or endorse this theory. We're just here to impartially break down the author's incredibly detailed blueprint for what he calls the natural economic order in the Web3 age. It's basically an attempt to rewrite the global financial system from the ground up. Here is our roadmap for today's breakdown. We'll be covering 1. The problem with fiat, 2. The natural economic order, 3. The three-layer economy, 4. Minting proof of growth, and finally, 5. The sovereign migration. All right, kicking things off with part 1, the problem with fiat. The author launches a really severe critique against our current economy, describing it as a deeply flawed Keynesian trap. In the legacy system, as Qasim sees it, everything is driven by fiat debt. It rewards stagnant capital, and it creates artificial scarcity. But his proposed alternative, the BMT system, flips that. It aims to be growth-based and rooted in thermodynamic abundance, essentially treating the economy as a living flow of energy rather than just people hoarding paper. Now, to explain the deep inequality in this legacy system, the author leans heavily on something called the Cantillon effect. Basically, when money is born out of debt, the people standing closest to the printing press, think major banks and financiers, get to spend that new money before prices rise. But by the time that money trickles down to the working class, it's already caused inflation, so your groceries and rent go up, but your paycheck stays exactly the same. The author argues this mechanism literally evaporates the purchasing power of the common laborer, acting as a massive invisible tax. Moving on to part 2, the natural economic order. So how do we get out of this systemic rut? Well, BMT actually looks backward to find a solution, specifically to a late 19th century economist named Silvio Gesell. Gesell observed a really interesting flaw in money. Think about it. Physical goods like grain, iron, or timber, they naturally decay over time. But traditional money, it's effectively immortal. And that allows people to hoard it indefinitely. To fix this, Gesell proposed a concept called demurrage, which BMT adopts. Think of it as money that literally rusts. It is a natural carrying cost applied to stagnant capital. If you just sit on your money, it mathematically decays, which forces it to circulate like blood in a healthy body, rather than stagnating in some vault. And the author actually puts an exact number on this friction, a 2.5% annual decay rate applied to idle capital through smart contracts. Now, back in Gesell's time, doing this required literally gluing stamps onto paper money, which, as you can imagine, was a total bureaucratic nightmare. But today, using blockchain code, the whole shebang happens automatically. This tiny, persistent friction heavily disincentivizes hoarding, and it forces capital holders to invest in real-world production if they want to preserve their wealth. Next up, part 3, the three-layer economy. You might be wondering, how on earth do you structure a global society around this rusting money principle? The author proposes stacking the global economy into 3 distinct, interoperable digital layers, building from the bottom up. At the base, you have the basic needs layer. That supports the middle tier, the traditional macroeconomics layer, which is your competitive market. And binding them all together at the very top is the microeconomics or governance layer. The author argues that separating the economy into these distinct functions is the key to creating a balanced, stable society. Let's zoom in on that foundational floor for a second, the basic needs layer, or BNL. The text makes a pretty bold argument here. For a true market to actually be free, humanity has to end the survival race. So the BNL proposes providing the absolute essentials: food, water, shelter, electricity, and internet, totally free at the point of use to all citizens. And it's funded by those demurrage fees we just talked about. This thermodynamic floor is designed to eliminate the coercion of survival. The idea is to liberate human cognitive energy so we can focus on innovation, rather than just, avoiding starvation. Which brings us to part 4, minting proof of growth. And this brings up an absolutely crucial question. If we aren't printing money as debt anymore, how does it actually get into the economy? Well, under the BMT system, money is issued as a public utility tied strictly to physical reality. It's a mechanism called proof of growth. Instead of a central bank just creating credit out of thin air, new currency, which the author calls the GDP coin, is only minted when verifiable real-world value is created. We're talking about a new solar farm coming online, an increase in crop yields, or a boost in grid efficiency. The money supply expands only when physical reality expands. To put that into perspective, let's look at how this applies to the environment through regenerative finance, or ReFi. Just imagine a community restoring a polluted river. In our legacy system, that's just a cost on a spreadsheet. But in BMT, it's a profit engine. First, IoT sensors, called oracles, verify the ecological restoration. Second, the system mints new GDP coins based on the rising biodiversity index. And third, those newly minted coins go straight to the local stewards who actually did the work. It literally makes it more profitable to leave a forest standing than it is to cut it down. Finally, let's look at part 5, the sovereign migration. Now, practically speaking, how do we get from our current reality, which has quadrillions in fiat debt, over to this new ledger without causing total chaos? The author envisions a dual-track strategy. It's essentially an engineering approach, where the legacy fiat system is used as temporary scaffolding. You don't burn down the old forest, instead you plant new seeds in its shade. Nations systematically bleed liquidity out of legacy institutions and into the decentralized BMT framework, creating a gradual, safe transition over to what he calls the global communist state. But to protect this fragile new system during the transition, the author outlines a 30% stability reserve held by a sovereign DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. This massive reserve of hard assets acts like a thermodynamic shock absorber. If the dying fiat system experiences massive volatility or hyperinflation, this 30% buffer is automatically deployed by smart contracts to protect the purchasing power of the new GDP coin. The author maps this whole thing out over a very specific 3-year roadmap. Year 1 is the sovereign anchor. That's where nations vault their real physical wealth and roll out biometric hardware wallets to citizens. Year 2 is the liquidity siphon, capturing productive capital and tokenizing public infrastructure. And finally, Year 3 culminates in day 0. That's the exact moment the basic needs layer activates globally and the coercion of survival officially ends. When you zoom out, this entire text is geared toward one monumental shift, moving humanity away from a debt-based extraction model where money is a tool of control to a growth-based model driven by physical laws and thermodynamic truth. It's a huge shift from a system of artificial scarcity to one that genuinely attempts to mathematically engineer abundance and human dignity. It's an incredibly dense, highly provocative theory, and it really forces us to reconsider the absolute basics of value and exchange. So I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder based on the author's work. Could a world where money actually rusts be the key to preventing human stagnation? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the systems around you.